My name is Auden Newman, and I'm 25 years old. On June 26th, Saturday, June 26th, I was downtown in the early afternoon with some friends involved in some peaceful protests, and we had to leave early in order to go to a fundraiser on the east side of town that we had a prior commitment to. We're at the fundraiser, and at some point during the evening, a friend of mine showed up and told us that a whole bunch of people had been arrested downtown mostly for doing peaceful action, and that they were being held at the Eastern Detention Center, which was actually just a few blocks away from where we were at the fundraiser. We were also told that people would be gathering outside the detention center at around midnight to do peaceful jail solidarity. And so shortly before 1 a.m. we decided we would go down and join them, and we walked to the detention center. When we got there was about 100 people outside. They were on the opposite side of the street from the detention center, not blocking traffic on the sidewalk. And there was a samba band playing, and people were singing and dancing and just generally trying to create a lot of joyous noise in a peaceful way, in the hopes that the people who were being detained inside would be able to hear us and would know that when they were released there was someone outside waiting to support them. Shortly after we arrived, a whole bunch of riot police started showing up on the scene, and they surrounded us on all sides and boxed us in. We then received 2 warnings from them to leave the area or else we would be arrested, but they didn't at any point during that provide us any avenue out. And then finally, after the second warning, they told us that if we all walked west, they would let us go. And they created a small avenue for us to start heading west, and we started walking west. Within a few blocks, the police again closed in. They cordoned off about 30 people near the end of the group. We at no point stopped walking. We'd been heading west the whole time, and they surrounded us, and they told us that we were all under arrest. They told us to place our hands on our heads, which we did. And then we waited for about 15 or 20 minutes until they finally told us to start coming forward one at a time so that they could arrest us. My arresting officer explained to me and to the group at large that we were all under arrest for breach of the peace. My arresting officer did also read me my rights, which I understand did not happen to a number of people who were arrested, but it did happen to me. My officer, who was actually very nice and quite informative, told me that I was under arrest for breach of the peace. He said none of us should worry, that it was a catch and release offense, it was not a criminal charge, and he actually said, which turned out to be very untrue, but he said that we would be out before he'd even finished the paperwork. At that point, we were about a block and a half away from the detention center because they told us to walk west. They loaded us into a paddy wagon, drove us around the block and into the detention center. My hands were secured with zip tie handcuffs behind my back. We sat in the paddy wagon for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, and during this time the zip tie on my left hand was so tight that now, about 8 or 9 days later, the back of my hand is still numb. We were told that we were part of a spillover and that we couldn't be processed right away when we arrived at the detention center, so they took us into the detention center. We walked past cages full of dozens of human beings. It was extremely cold in there. It was dirty. The lighting was very high, and they never dimmed the lights. There was closed caption cameras over each cell recording what was going on inside of them. I was put in a cell at the beginning there was about 8 of us, and as the night and the morning progressed, they added more and more people until there was 27 of us. We received very little food, very little water, the occasional cheese sandwich and little styrofoam cups of water. There was a woman in my cell with me whose zip ties were so tight that her right hand actually swelled up and she began to develop large bruises across the back of her hand. Many of us were not actually processed for a very long period of time. I was taken out of the cell after almost 22 hours to begin the processing. I had not at this point received a phone call or any legal counsel, and in fact I would never receive any of that while I was in detention. I was taken to the booking trailers to be processed, and an officer explained to me that I was going to be charged with participating in an unlawful assembly. I told him that that was incorrect, that I had been arrested for breach of the peace, and he told me that, actually they're the same thing, which of course is a complete lie. Breach of the peace is not a criminal charge, and being part of an unlawful assembly is a criminal charge. I was then taken in front of the booking sergeant, who also told me that I was going to be charged with being part of an unlawful assembly and that I would be held overnight and taken to court the next day for a bail hearing. I explained to him as well that my arresting officer had told me that I was being arrested for breach of the peace, that it was not a criminal charge, and that I would be released without criminal charges. And I felt at this point that they were trying to intimidate me into just going along with whatever they said, into throwing my hands up and shrugging and saying, well, okay, if you're going to charge me with that, I'm not going to say anything. And I can imagine that easily could have happened to me if I hadn't known what I know about my rights, if I hadn't known if the arresting officer hadn't given me the information that he had given me about the charge, or the lack of charge in this case, or even if I've just been, that little bit more tired or that little bit more worn down, and I could have easily submitted to what they were trying to do, which was charge me with something that was different from what I was arrested for. But I dug my heels in about it, and I kept arguing with them that that was not actually what I'd been arrested for, and that they couldn't charge me with that. They told me I was going to be put through a level 3 strip search, and I was taken over to the strip search area. I was waiting to have the strip search happen, and at a certain point during that, the booking sergeant apparently miraculously changed his mind, told me that I would not be charged with being part of an unlawful assembly, and that I would in fact be released. He also told me at that point that I would be given a phone call and a chance to speak to a lawyer before my release, but that never happened. I was taken from the booking area to another cell. I was held there for about 2 more hours, and then I was released back into the street after about 24 hours, just handed my evidence bag and walked out the door in my bare feet to the wet street. And that was it. And thankfully when I got out, there was about 50 people waiting in the exact spot where we've been waiting when we've been doing jail solidarity. Just waiting out there with food and water and hugs and rides home and all of the things that we've been trying to provide 24 hours earlier to people who are arrested.